The world watched in silence as Cristiano Ronaldo walked alone through the tunnel of Al Thumama Stadium. Cameras followed, but he didn't look back. The crowd's roar, moments ago deafening, had dissolved into the low hum of disbelief. All that remained was the echo of his footsteps, slow and heavy, reverberating through concrete. For 2 decades, Ronaldo had been Portugal's immortal, the man who made time itself seem negotiable. But on that December evening in Qatar, time finally called his name. This was no ordinary exit. It wasn't just the end of a match. It was the closing scene of an era. Every camera on Earth seemed to find him. Broadcast lenses, fan phones, even drones hovering above the tunnel mouth. Millions watched in real time as the world's most famous footballer walked toward the unknown. The digital world froze that moment, looping it endlessly on TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. A slow-motion heartbreak broadcast to every corner of the planet. For years, Ronaldo had been a symbol of control, of perfection engineered through discipline and defiance. Yet here, stripped of triumph, he looked human again. The image of him wiping tears as he disappeared into the tunnel wasn't just about football. It was about mortality. About the question no algorithm can solve: what happens when greatness runs out of time? Portugal's 2022 World Cup was the story of a team and a nation caught between the past and the future. On the field, they were a side of extraordinary depth, veterans of glory intertwined with rising heirs to the throne. Off it, they were symbols of a new football culture, one defined by 24-hour scrutiny, digital hysteria, and a fan base that lived the game through screens as much as through stadiums. Under Fernando Santos, the architect of Portugal's Euro 2016 triumph, the team entered Qatar with quiet optimism. It was, on paper, one of their strongest squads ever assembled. Pepe, still indestructible at 39. Bernardo Silva, the creative heartbeat of Manchester City. Bruno Fernandes, the midfield general. João Felix, still chasing his full potential. And Ronaldo, the eternal reference point, the axis around which everything revolved. Their campaign began brightly. A nervy but thrilling 3-2 victory over Ghana reminded the world of Portugal's flair and fragility in equal measure. Ronaldo, at 37, became the first man in history to score in 5 different World Cups, an achievement that felt both inevitable and poetic. But even in celebration, something was off. His smile didn't reach his eyes. The chemistry on the field looked forced. The digital tide began to turn. Every gesture became a meme. Every substitution, a trending topic. Fans and analysts dissected body language as if decoding state secrets. The team no longer played in isolation, they played in front of billions of invisible spectators armed with opinions, data, and editing software. In the modern game, perception travels faster than performance. Then came the decision that split a nation. Santos benched Ronaldo. It was pragmatic, perhaps even overdue, a tactical reshuffle to inject pace and unpredictability. But in the digital age, it became something else entirely, a global debate about loyalty, ego, and legacy. Twitter burned for hours. YouTube reaction streams filled with tears and fury. Some saw it as the birth of a new Portugal, others as an act of betrayal. In Ronaldo's place stepped Goncalo Ramos, a 21-year-old forward, with little international experience but limitless audacity. Against Switzerland in the round of 16, Ramos erupted with a hat-trick, the first of the tournament, as Portugal demolished the Swiss 6-1. It was a statement game, the kind of performance that makes a nation believe in destiny again. Bruno Fernandes orchestrated, Felix danced between lines, and Bernardo dictated the rhythm. The team looked reborn, lighter, freer, unburdened by expectation. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the transition had been mastered. That Portugal had found harmony between the old and the new. But football, like history, rarely allows clean handovers. 4 days later, Morocco stood waiting, a side built on defensive unity, heart, and something less tangible, belief. The Atlas Lions were not supposed to be there, yet their resolve had carried them past Spain And now they faced Portugal, with the calm of a team that had already rewritten the script. What followed would defy the logic of rankings and reputations. A single leap, Youssef Un-Nesyri soaring above the Portuguese defence, changed everything. His header, arcing beyond Diogo Costa, wasn't just a goal. It was a fracture line in Portugal's story. When the final whistle blew, Morocco danced into history, and Portugal were left to reckon with the silence that follows disbelief. Ronaldo's walk through the tunnel became the final act of a football myth, captured in pixels and hearts alike. But to understand that silence, the pain and symbolism of that lonely walk, we have to rewind. To the boy from Madeira who turned ambition into destiny, and to a Portugal that learned to dream through him. Because before the end, there was a beginning. Before the tears, before the tunnel, there was a boy. A boy from an island at the edge of Europe, a volcanic rock adrift in the Atlantic called Madeira. Cristiano Ronaldo dos Santos Aveiro was born there in 1985, in a small house overlooking the sea where dreams seemed as distant as the mainland. His father, José Diniz Aveiro, worked as a kitman for a local club. His mother, Maria Dolores, cleaned houses to keep the lights on. Football wasn't just his escape. It was the only language he ever truly spoke. As a child, Ronaldo's talent was a rumor that spread through Fonchal's narrow streets. He would play barefoot, dribbling through older kids, using walls as teammates. Neighbors said he cried when he lost, not out of ego, but because defeat felt like injustice. By 12, his family made the impossible choice. They sent him alone to Lisbon to join Sporting CP's academy. For the boy who'd never left his island, it was both exile and opportunity. In Lisbon, he cried almost every night. The city was colder, harsher, less forgiving. His accent made him an outsider. His hunger made him a target. Teammates mocked his obsession, the extra sprints, the late-night training, the push-ups before bed. But soon, those same boys watched in awe as he outgrew them all. By 16, Sporting's coaches were whispering about the kid who could do things no one else dared to try. By 17, he had debuted for the first team. And then came that night, the friendly against Manchester United in 2003 that changed everything. Ronaldo tore United's defence apart, spinning past veterans as if gravity didn't apply to him. On the flight back to England, United's players begged Sir Alex Ferguson to sign him. Within weeks, he did. From there, Ronaldo's story became legend, the scrawny teenager transformed into a machine of willpower and precision. He learned under Ferguson, then conquered the world under the floodlights of Old Trafford and Santiago Bernabeu. He redefined professionalism, sculpting his body and brand with equal devotion. Every goal, every celebration, every camera angle was controlled. And yet, beneath the glinting surface, he remained the same restless boy, desperate to prove that greatness wasn't a gift, but a choice. For Portugal, he became more than a player. He was identity embodied. The nation that had always lived in the shadows of its colonial past, of heartbreaks, and golden generations that fell short, finally had a hero who refused to lose. Ronaldo turned the impossible into expectation. The missed penalty of Euro 2004, the tears of 2006, the near misses of 2010, all of it fed the fire. When he finally lifted the European Championship trophy in 2016, limping on the sideline, shouting commands after his injury, it felt like Portugal itself had exorcised a century of doubt. But by 2022, time had begun to close in. Football had changed. The world had changed. Ronaldo was no longer the future. He was history still trying to compete with the present. And around him, a new Portugal had grown. One built not on individual brilliance, but on collective control. Bruno Fernandes represented this evolution, cerebral, analytical, a leader of data and discipline. Bernardo Silva, the quiet genius, moved through games like a mathematician drawing patterns no one else could see. João Felix was the artist, raw but luminous, a reminder that Portugal still dreamed through creativity. And Goncalo Ramos, the youngest of them all, embodied the new energy, a generation raised not on myth, but on highlights. This generational handoff was inevitable but painful. Inside the Portuguese camp, there was respect, but also tension. Santos had always trusted experience, the men who had delivered him glory. But the world outside was louder now. Every lineup became a public poll. Every tactical choice a referendum on the future of Portuguese football. And beyond the stadium walls, something else was changing. The way football was consumed, celebrated and weaponized. Platforms like YouTube and TikTok had turned fans into broadcasters, influencers into analysts. In this new world, football wasn't just watched, it was lived in real time. Enter iShowSpeed, the hyperactive, chaotic face of a new generation of fandom. His viral obsession with Ronaldo turned into global spectacle. Millions tuned in daily to his reactions, his chants, his tears. He represented a truth the old guard still struggled to accept. Football's future wasn't just about what happened on the pitch. It was about what happened online. And in that sense, Portugal's story in 2022 was prophetic. It wasn't merely a national team campaign. It was a reflection of how identity, fandom, and legacy now collided under digital light. The players were no longer just athletes. They were living symbols, coexisting with their own digital shadows. As the tournament approached, Portugal arrived in Qatar not only burdened by expectation, but haunted by surveillance. The cameras were everywhere, in training, in tunnels, on planes, in the smallest gestures. Every moment, every rumor, every post was magnified and replayed. There was no private Portugal anymore. Yet amid the noise, one truth remained. This was still Cristiano Ronaldo's team. Whether he started or sat, whether he scored or not, every story, every frame, every conversation revolved around him. The boy from Madeira had once dreamed of the world watching him. In 2022, the world did, closer than ever before. But, as Portugal's journey began, the question lingered. Could a legend share his stage with the future he once inspired? The answer would unfold not in speeches or headlines, but on the pitch, under the unforgiving lights of Qatar. The World Cup is a strange kind of theatre. Every team arrives rehearsed, tactics drilled, roles defined. But once the whistle blows, emotion rewrites the script. For Portugal in 2022, that emotion lived at the intersection of pride and pressure. They entered Qatar not as underdogs, but as something more fragile, a nation trying to hold on to an identity it was outgrowing. Fernando Santos, conservative by instinct, had built his philosophy around control and loyalty. It had worked before, the 2016 triumph, the Nations League title in 2019, but football evolves fast. And this squad, humming with creativity, demanded freedom. Their group stage campaign began in Doha against Ghana, and it showed everything that Portugal were, and everything they weren't. The first half was cautious, almost sterile, the ball circulating like a nervous heartbeat. But then, in the 65th minute, a familiar story returned. Ronaldo, fouled in the box, stepped up to the penalty spot. The noise swelled, the cameras zoomed. He exhaled, struck, and history shifted once again. The ball crashed into the net, 1-0. Cristiano Ronaldo became the first man to score in 5 different World Cups. It was more than a goal. It was a signature carved into time itself. He sprinted toward the corner flag, arms wide, face ablaze, and for a moment, it felt like the world was watching one last act of defiance from a king refusing to yield. But the game, like his era, was moving faster than he could control. Ghana fought back, exposing Portugal's defensive nerves. Bruno Fernandes, calm amidst chaos, became the compass, threading 2 perfect assists to João Felix and Rafael Leão. Portugal scraped through 3-2. Thrilling, yes, but unstable. The cracks were there if you looked closely enough. Next came Uruguay, a night thick with tension. The stadium air was heavy with history, 2 old powers facing twilight. Bruno Fernandes emerged again, his quiet intensity cutting through the noise. He scored twice, orchestrating play with a surgeon's precision. Portugal won 2-0, sealing qualification early. The system seemed to be working. Santos's discipline, Fernandes's vision, Ronaldo's presence still gravitational. But by the third match, against South Korea, the mood had changed. Ronaldo, substituted early, left the pitch shaking his head. Cameras zoomed in on the gesture. Commentators speculated. Social media exploded. What might once have been forgotten became fuel for debate. Was he frustrated with his coach? With himself? With time? The digital era offered no mercy. Every emotion became content. Portugal lost that game 2-1. It didn't matter for progression, but it mattered for perception. The cracks widened. Critics began to whisper that Santos's loyalty to the old guard might cost them. Behind closed doors, quiet conversations began, about balance, about energy, about the courage to evolve. That courage came in the round of 16. The opponent, Switzerland. The decision, seismic. Santos benched Ronaldo. The world stopped. The announcement rippled through every corner of the internet. News anchors, pundits, YouTubers, everyone had a take. The reaction was global theatre, tears from fans, disbelief from journalists. Joy from those who had long argued the team played better without him. The story of Portugal's World Cup had shifted overnight from tactics to legacy. When the match began, the question wasn't whether Portugal would win, it was how they would survive without their talisman. What followed wasn't survival, it was rebirth. In the 17th minute, Goncalo Ramos, just 21, playing his first World Cup start, unleashed a thunderous strike from an impossible angle. The ball ripped into the top corner. The stadium froze. It was a goal of defiance, youth announcing itself to the world. The camera cut to Ronaldo on the bench, clapping, expression unreadable. From there, Portugal exploded. Ramos scored again, and again, a hat-trick. The first of the tournament. João Felix danced through the Swiss defence with a smile that felt like freedom. Bruno Fernandes commanded like a general. Pepe, ancient and indestructible, thundered home a header to remind the world that age too could be defiant. The scoreboard read 6-1. It was breathtaking, ruthless, transcendent. A generation that had grown up in Ronaldo's shadow finally stepped into the sun. The internet erupted. Hashtags, memes, debates, highlight reels. Ramos became an overnight sensation, his name echoing through every corner of football culture. Even iShowSpeed, the self-proclaimed voice of Ronaldo fandom, streamed his disbelief live, his confusion, mirroring millions of fans who suddenly realized Portugal might just have found life beyond their king. But even as the world celebrated, the undercurrent was uneasy. Because football is never just about results. It's about resonance. Ronaldo's presence, even in absence, hung over everything. Cameras searched for his reactions, producers replayed every glance. Could a nation that had built its identity around one man truly let him go mid-tournament? Inside the camp, teammates walked a careful line. They spoke of unity, of respect. Bruno Fernandes, who had once clashed with Ronaldo over penalties and positioning, insisted there was no rift. João Felix praised the captain's leadership. But the energy had shifted. The dynamic had changed. The air was lighter and heavier all at once. After the game, reporters asked Santos the inevitable question, "Why now?" He answered with quiet finality. "I choose what is best for the team," he said. No emotion, no apology. It was football logic, but humanly seismic. And so Portugal advanced to the quarterfinals not just as contenders, but as a team reborn. Dynamic, expressive, unpredictable. Yet, in the background, destiny was plotting something cruel. For on the other side of the bracket stood Morocco, a team running not on reputation, but on rhythm. The Atlas Lions, led by Walid Regragui, had already shocked Spain. Their spirit was unbreakable, their defense immaculate, their purpose pure. Portugal's story was about transition. Morocco's was about transcendence. And when those two forces collided in the desert of Qatar, football itself would hold its breath. The quarter-final at Al Thumama Stadium carried an air of inevitability, though no one yet knew in which direction it would fall. Portugal arrived fresh off their 6-1 demolition of Switzerland, hailed as a reborn side. The headlines were grand, the tone triumphant. But across the pitch stood Morocco, an unassuming wall of belief. The first African and Arab nation to reach this stage of the World Cup. They carried the weight of continents, and somehow they wore it lightly. In the build-up, the noise was deafening. The world wasn't talking about Morocco's tactical genius, it was talking about Ronaldo, benched again, for a man whose name had defined Portugal for nearly 20 years. This was uncharted territory. The cameras found him during the national anthem, face expressionless, eyes distant. Every gesture was magnified, every second a headline. Yet the team, outwardly, stayed composed. Bruno Fernandes, Portugal's quiet orchestrator, radiated determination. João Felix, always the dreamer, looked ready to take the fight to Morocco's back line. Bernardo Silva, that perfect blend of vision and humility, remained the engine of order. But there was unease, a sense that something sacred had been disrupted. Morocco, under Walid Regragui, were the perfect underdog machine. Their system was deceptively simple: deep defensive structure, compact lines and lightning-fast transitions. Hakim Ziyech's creativity on one flank, Achraf Hakimi's power on the other, Sofiane Amrabat's tireless balance in the middle. And behind it all, the composure of goalkeeper Yassine Bono Bounou, the calm eye in a hurricane. From the first whistle, Morocco's intent was clear. They pressed intelligently, then retreated in unison. Portugal probed, but found no rhythm. Every pass met a red wall, every run swallowed by a shape that seemed to anticipate the future. João Felix tested Bono early with a curling effort, forcing a fingertip save, a reminder that Portugal still had teeth. But Morocco's resolve only deepened. Then, in the 42nd minute, came the moment that shattered the equilibrium. A high, looping cross from Yahya Atiat Allah sailed into the Portuguese box. Youssef En-Nesyri rose into the Doha night, higher than anyone, higher than physics seemed to allow. Diogo Costa came to claim, too late. The header crashed into the net, 1-0. Al Thumama erupted. Red flags waved like fire in the stands. On the touchline, Regragui roared. In that moment, Morocco weren't just leading, they were rewriting history. For Portugal, disbelief set in. Santos stood frozen, his tactical plan unraveling. On the bench, Ronaldo sat motionless, eyes fixed on the pitch. For the first time, it wasn't just a match slipping away, it was control itself. The second half began like a siege. Portugal dominated possession, the ball constantly circling the Moroccan penalty area. Bruno Fernandes rattled the crossbar with a rising strike. Felix weaved through defenders, denied again by Bono's fingertips. Every save seemed to draw energy from somewhere deeper, from the chants of history rising in the stands. In the 51 stones minute, Santos made the inevitable move. The fourth official's board lit up, number 7. The stadium exhaled. Ronaldo stepped onto the pitch for what would be the final time in a World Cup. He jogged forward, jaws set, the weight of nations and decades pressing on his shoulders. The Moroccan fans cheered him out of admiration as much as defiance. For the next half hour, every Portuguese attack revolved around him. Every cross seeking his head, every pass hoping for redemption. But the walls held. Bono was immense. Amrabat seemed to exist in two places at once, cutting off every line, smothering every build-up. Even as fatigue crept in, Morocco's structure never cracked. As the minutes drained away, Portugal's attacks grew desperate. Long balls, scrambles, half-chances. Ronaldo had one clear opportunity, a driven shot across goal in the 91 stones minute. Bono met it with destiny in his gloves. When the whistle blew, Morocco collapsed into tears of joy. Players fell to their knees. The bench emptied. The first African nation in history had reached a World Cup semi-final. The Atlas Lions had done it. Portugal stood, motionless. Felix wiped his face. Bruno looked to the sky. And Ronaldo, he turned and began to walk. No ceremony, no handshake, no final salute, just that walk. Through the tunnel, through the echoes, through the end of a story 20 years in the making. Around the world, screens filled with that image. It wasn't broadcast just once. It multiplied instantly. Shared, edited, soundtracked. On TikTok, fans slowed the footage to piano music. On YouTube, reactions streamed live. Millions watched in silence as he disappeared into darkness. For the first time, the legend who had been everywhere seemed unreachable. In that moment, Portugal's World Cup ended not with a bang, but with a broadcast. Their defeat became data, analyzed, replayed, consumed. And yet beneath the noise there was something raw, almost sacred, the kind of silence that football rarely allows. Because what unfolded that night wasn't just a match. It was a parable about transition, between eras, between generations, between realities. The analog hero meeting the digital world, the old Portugal giving way to the new. And as Morocco celebrated their miracle, Portugal stood at a crossroads. The war had ended. The legend had fallen. But something else, something uncertain, maybe hopeful, was already beginning to rise. There are moments in sport that escape the boundaries of time. They're not just remembered, they're recorded into collective memory. Cristiano Ronaldo's final World Cup walk was one of them. It wasn't a goal or a trophy lift. It was something quieter, more profound. A private heartbreak, made public. The camera followed him from the field into the tunnel, a single, unbroken shot that became the emotional axis of Portugal's entire tournament. Sweat, tears and silence, the trinity of endings. He covered his face with his hand, turned once toward the noise, then vanished into shadow. For millions watching, it wasn't just the end of Portugal's campaign. It was the closing chapter of one of football's greatest lives. This, the climax, wasn't about the match itself anymore. It was about what it meant. In the locker room, reports said nothing. There were no fiery speeches, no visible breakdowns, just exhaustion, physical, emotional, generational. Bruno Fernandes sat quietly staring at his boots. João Felix, still processing the loss, muttered about how close they'd come. Fernando Santos, stoic as always, kept his eyes on the floor. Pepe, the eternal warrior, spoke first. "We lost to destiny," he said softly. It wasn't resignation, it was respect. Outside, the world moved at the speed of light. Within hours, the image of Ronaldo's walk had circled the globe. On Twitter, tributes flooded in. On TikTok, the footage was set to melancholic piano covers. On YouTube, live reaction videos racked up millions of views. For the first time, the end of a player's era wasn't just witnessed. It was experienced together, digitally, globally, emotionally. Even those who had never supported Portugal felt something, that universal ache of watching greatness fade. It was as if the sport itself was saying goodbye to a version of itself. Meanwhile, back in Doha, Morocco's celebration was still echoing through the night. The sound of drums and chants filled the desert air. Yassine Bounou, the goalkeeper who had denied Ronaldo's last chance, lifted his arms to the sky. Walid Regragui, their coach, reminded the world what belief could do. They had played with spirit, precision, and purpose. And in doing so, they had redefined what was possible for African football. But for Portugal, the feeling was different. It wasn't anger, it was emptiness. Ronaldo left the stadium without speaking to the press. His face was hidden, but the world didn't need words. They had the image, and in the digital age, image is language. It was reposted, reframed, remixed. He became both human and myth again, as he always had, a man simultaneously celebrated and dissected. Fernando Santos knew what the image meant. It wasn't just a player leaving the field, it was a symbol of closure. In many ways, his own era was ending too. The coach who had delivered Portugal's greatest triumphs, Euro 2016 and the Nations League, was now being questioned. Fans who once praised his conservatism now blamed it for suffocating a golden generation. Too defensive, said one headline. Too loyal, said another. But what was loyalty in a world that moved this fast? In the digital storm of opinions, analysis, and viral clips, nuance drowned. Santos was an analog man managing a digital crisis. His quiet authority, once comforting, now seemed outdated against the backdrop of endless commentary. Even inside the squad, change felt inevitable. The younger players, Bruno, Bernardo, Felix, spoke in the language of modern football, adaptable, expressive, interconnected. Their energy was different. Not rebellious, but impatient. They wanted movement, fluidity, evolution. And yet, in the midst of that transition, they all shared one truth. Ronaldo had made them believe. He had shown them that Portugal could stand among giants, that dreams could be chased without apology. That night, in the team hotel, long after the cameras had stopped rolling, a silence settled over the players. Some watched clips of the match on their phones, others texted family back home. Bruno Fernandes, usually reserved, wrote a message to the fans on Instagram. "We gave everything. We will rise again." It became the unofficial epilogue to Portugal's tournament. But elsewhere online, another conversation was unfolding, not about tactics or goals, but about the meaning of it all. Fans debated what it meant to witness the fall of a legend in real time. How the immediacy of social media made grief collective. How, for the first time, the world didn't just read about the end of an era, they watched it, together, second by second. Ronaldo's story had always been cinematic, but now it was interactive. The fans were part of the frame. The digital age had blurred the line between audience and participant. Football, once played on grass and remembered in print, now lived on screens, looping endlessly. And perhaps that's why his walk hit so hard. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was recognition that everyone, in some way, was growing older alongside him. By dawn, his final image had transcended football entirely. It had become modern mythology, the warrior departing the battlefield alone. The man who had conquered everything but time. For Portugal, it was heartbreak. For the world, it was history. And as the sun rose over Doha, the story of Cristiano Ronaldo and Portugal's 2020. Two World Cup had reached its climax, not with victory, but with vulnerability. The morning after elimination, Doha was silent. The noise had drained from the city, leaving behind only banners and footprints in the sand. Portugal's hotel, once alive with laughter and music, felt hollow. The players packed their bags, their expressions unreadable. Outside, the world was still talking, not about the scoreline, but about what it all meant. Because this World Cup, Portugal's World Cup, wasn't only about football, it was about change, about how an era of icons gave way to an age of algorithms, about how greatness, once built on mystique, now lived under the lens of constant exposure. In many ways, Portugal 2022 became the symbol of modern football itself, brilliant, fractured, and endlessly visible. Fernando Santos would step down weeks later. His departure was inevitable, almost ceremonial. In his place would come Roberto Martinez, a coach fluent in the language of modernity, charged with ushering Portugal into its next chapter. The appointment said everything: evolution, not erasure. A new Portugal, built on pressing, possession and purpose, ready to dance in the daylight of a new digital era. But for now, the shadow of Doha still lingered. Cristiano Ronaldo returned to his home in Madeira before the year ended. The images of him training alone on the island, focused, expressionless, still chasing perfection, became their own quiet story. He would soon make headlines again, this time for his move to Al Nassr in Saudi Arabia. Critics called it a retirement, others called it revolution, a legend pioneering football's next frontier. But beneath the debates and numbers, one truth pulsed steady: his hunger remained. For Portugal's younger stars, the tournament became both wound and awakening. Bruno Fernandes emerged as the leader he had always hinted he could be. the conductor of a new rhythm. Bernardo Silva returned to Manchester City sharper, his vision deepened by heartbreak. João Felix rediscovered his boldness, finally stepping into games with less hesitation. And Goncalo Ramos, the boy who scored a hat-trick in his first World Cup start, became the new face of promise, a reminder that Portuguese football's flame hadn't dimmed. But perhaps the most remarkable legacy of that winter lay beyond the pitch. The 2022 World Cup wasn't just played in Qatar, it was broadcast through the veins of the internet in real time. For the first time, the world didn't wait for newspapers or highlights. It lived every second. Every reaction, every heartbreak, every celebration became communal. Football had entered its digital singularity, and nowhere was that clearer than in how Portugal's story unfolded online. iShowSpeed's chaotic devotion to Ronaldo became a global event, part comedy, part sincerity, part cultural phenomenon. When Ronaldo cried, millions cried with him. When Portugal fell, entire timelines fell silent. Football was no longer just a game between nations. It was a shared emotional network spanning the planet. In the old world, heroes lived in myth. In the new world, they live in pixels. And yet, the emotion remains the same. Because even when filtered through screens, football still does what it has always done. It breaks us open and makes us believe again. For Portugal, the 2022 World Cup became the mirror of their national story, a story of persistence, reinvention, and the eternal tension between heritage and progress. They had gone to Qatar seeking glory, but left with something subtler, something perhaps more valuable: perspective. Ronaldo's journey through that tournament, from record-breaking debut to that silent exit, reflected more than personal loss. It captured the fragility of legacy in a world that never stops watching. In a sense, it was fitting. His career had always been about control, of the ball, of the moment, of the narrative. But his final World Cup showed that even he couldn't control time. And maybe that's what made it beautiful. In the months that followed, his absence became presence. His name still trended. His image still inspired. Children still mimicked his CAU celebration in schoolyards from Lisbon to Lagos to Los Angeles. Portugal had lost a tournament, but kept a mythology. The digital age ensures that heroes never really disappear, they simply replay forever. And yet, behind all the noise, a quiet truth endures. Portugal is more than one man. It is a nation of storytellers, builders, believers. Its football, like its people, adapts, evolving with each generation, carrying both pride and pain like twin hearts beating in time. The 2022 World Cup was not a failure. It was a reckoning, the moment Portugal saw itself reflected in the mirror of modernity. When the final whistle blew in Qatar, one era ended, but another began. A Portugal led not by the echoes of the past, but by the voices of the future. A world where greatness isn't defined by solitude, but by connection. And somewhere, on a beach in Madeira, a man still trains, still dreams, still believes, because legends don't stop when the world moves on. They keep running into memory, into myth, into forever.